Well, welcome. We're so happy that you could join us today. And I have, as my guest today, Jim Nix, who is head of the L&G White Estate. Jim, welcome. So
Thank you.
To have
it's good to be here.
And it is just a real privilege to get to visit with this gentleman. He is one of the most outstanding historians anywhere in the country, but especially in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And with a specific area of expertise, though he has a great general area, of the spirit of prophecy and of Adventist history. And so we're going to really enjoy this today. You're going to learn some things. We're going to have a good time visiting with Jim and realizing that the gift of prophecy is a gift that was given to this church. And we're so thankful for that gift. You know, sometimes people get the idea that the gift of prophecy is a prophet sits around all day talking about the future and foreseeing the future. There are prophecies that take place in the work of a prophet, but more than that, the prophet directs us to the Word of God, directs us, and if you look back at Elijah and Isaiah and all the others, they didn't spend all their time talking about the future. They spent a great deal of their time pointing people, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. And I think you're going to see today that that has been a great deal of the gift of prophecy for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And as a result, we have been leading and been led to move into the right direction and to follow the counsel of the Word of God. So we're going to really learn some things today, and I think you're going to enjoy this discussion that Jim and I are going to have together. Before we do that, I'd like for us to hear some music. And Jamie George is one of my favorite individuals. I was talking to Jamie the other day, and he's got some really fantastic plans for the future as we were talking about and praying about. And you'll hear more about those a little later. But right now, he's going to play for us, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. Well, thank you very much, Jamie. I really appreciate that. That was beautiful music. I know sometimes when I thank people like that, I have a lady that writes me occasionally and saying, you're being dishonest because you're making people think he's right there right now. Well, he's not right here right now, but I can still thank him because I hope he's going to be watching this program. And we do really appreciate Jamie and his ministry. Now, Jim Nix is the director of the Ellen G. White Estate. What is that, Jim?
The Ellen G. White Estate is the literary estate. Some people call it estates. They think it's multiple estates. It was her literary estate. And she, of course, had written many thousands of pages of materials, which she had in a vault at her home in Elms Haven in Northern California. And 3 years before her death, she wrote a will, like everybody should have a good will, and she left her literary estate to 5 trustees that she named. And it was, she doesn't use the word self-perpetuating board, but that's what they are. She made provisions for if there's a vacancy, how that vacancy was to be filled. So today, because it's been almost 100 years since she died in 1915, why there are 15 trustees, but we carry on the work that she assigned. Now, basically, what she assigned was to protect her originals. That makes sense. She had them in a vault. Today, they are housed at the General Conference in a vault, a fireproof vault. We are also to make translations of her books. She wanted them translated in languages other than English. So that's a big part of the work of the White Estate with the assistance of the General Conference. She also wanted compilations made from her works. I know sometimes people think, well, the church, when they want to make a little money, they just bring out a new compilation from Ellen White. Not so. Ellen White left instructions. She knew the value of the material that God had given her, that she'd written out, and as needs arose in the future, she left instruction that compilations from her writings, unpublished writings, and previously published writings be made. So we do that. Now, those are the kinds of things, oh, and to protect her copyrights. Yeah. She also left her copyrights to her books, to the trustees. So the White Estate continues to copyright books and to protect her copyrights. Now, those are the things she mentioned in her will. With the passing of time, a few other assignments have come to the White Estate. Obviously, part of our work now is educational. Who was Ellen White? What contribution did she make, et cetera, in the church? We also lead tours. People want to go on a denominational history tour. I don't know when that got started, but 50 or 60 years ago, the White Estate started providing tour guides for groups that want to go and visit where the church began. And more recently, the General Conference actually asked the White Estate, an official vote, to be the promoter of the heritage of the church on behalf of the General Conference. So part of our assignment now from the General Conference, when I say ours, the White Estate's assignment, is to help remind people the heritage of God's leading in the church, to encourage our church members and our church organizations around the world, don't forget what God did. You didn't just show up today. There's a history there, and it's God's story.
Well, now, you mentioned that the General Conference asked the White Estate. That would indicate that there is a separation between the White Estate and the General Conference.
That surprises people.
Yeah.
Ellen White did not leave her manuscripts, or unpublished manuscripts, letters and manuscripts, to the church. She left it to this other organization, trustees, which is now it's legally incorporated. And so we work very closely. I mean, the original trustees included the president of the General Conference and the editor of the church paper. Well, currently on our trustees, we have the president of the General Conference, and maybe we were a little smarter than she was. We have the treasurer of the General Conference also, as well as the editor of the review and other church leaders. So, yeah, it's still a we couldn't operate without the General Conference. No. We believe that the General Conference really couldn't operate without Ellen White and the White Estate.
You know, that organization has been an inspiration to us, and we operate very similarly to that. We have denominational leaders that are on our board. The assistant to the North American Division president's on our board. We've got union presidents, a conference president, different people of that nature on our board. However, the board is independent, but we work very carefully with the church. And, you know, our whole mission is to give the message, the three angels' messages, which is the message of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But we do so independently.
Well, that's what we all should be. I mean, we're all working for one goal.
Exactly.
The Lord's not going to come and pick up the White Estate trustees in a cloud by himself from the rest of the church or the 3ABN group. You know, he's going to come and get us all at the same time. Exactly. So we should be working together.
And that's absolutely true. Now, how did you get involved with the White Estate?
Well, that's an interesting story, and let me unpack it for you.
All right.
I was a college student more semesters ago than I want to admit now, and we had a week of prayer speaker come to the school. And I must confess, I have no idea what he was talking about. I don't remember. I have told him that later on, but he changed my life. On one of his sermons, he had an illustration, and he said, on Sabbath, when I'm preaching, and he happened to be the pastor of the Mountain View, California, Seventh-day Adventist Church at that time.
What was his name?
Louis Venden.
Oh, okay. All right.
So he was the pastor, and he said that on Sabbath he had a little elderly lady in his congregation that would sit and go like this during his sermons. And once in a great while, he said, she'd go like this. And he said when she went like this, he knew he'd made a theological blunder, and it would serve him well if he would go visit her during the week. Then in passing, he mentioned that she had known Ellen White, this little lady, had known Ellen White and Stephen Haskell and John Loughborough and some of these pioneers, the people that I had learned about in history.
Right.
But up to that moment, I don't know why, I was at a school in California, I don't know why it had never dawned on me that I could go talk to somebody who remembered these people.
Okay.
I mean, in my thinking, not chronologically because I knew when they were born and died, but in my thinking, Ellen White was a contemporary of Martin Luther or Paul or Moses.
Right.
You know, I mean, she was someone I studied, I read, I was blessed by, but I didn't.
You had no idea that someone was still alive who actually knew her.
So I said to myself, I've got to go talk to the speaker and find out who this little lady was.
Yeah.
So the next school break, I went to visit her. This lady, her name was Mrs. Alma McKibben. And she was the first Seventh-day Adventist Church school teacher in California. And I don't have time to tell the old tale, except...
tell it.
Well, I'm very shy. Most people don't believe that, but I really am quite shy. I force myself to do things that I'm not comfortable.
It's just the two of us talking, and so you can tell me.
Right, okay. So I drive to this lady's house. She's in her 90s. That's all I knew about her. I'd never met her. Didn't tell her I was coming. And I said to myself, I can't go and talk to this lady. So I drove around the block 2 or 3 times. Each time I came back, parked in front of her house, said to myself, finally said to myself, what in the world is a 90-some-year-old lady going to do to you, a college student? Yeah. I mean, go up there and knock on her door and see if she's home. So I get up there, knock on the door. Or before I knock on the door, there's a note on the door from her doctor saying, Mrs. McKibben has a voice condition. Please limit yourself to 15 minutes, your visits to 15 minutes.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, well, I want her to tell me stories.
Yeah.
It's going to be more than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, talk about God's timing. I had no idea that I'd ever work for the White Estate. I hardly knew there was a White Estate, frankly, at that age of my life.
Yeah.
And through the Venetian blinds, there's the door, and there was a window right next to the door. Through the Venetian blinds is this little elderly hand motioning me to come in. And this school teacher, even though she was in her 90s, sized up this nervous, scared, shy kid, put me right at ease, and began talking and telling me stories about Ellen White.
Yeah.
After we had talked for maybe an hour, I don't know how long, I finally said to her, Mrs. McKibben, I brought a tape recorder. Could I record you? And she said, sure. So you remember those great big old reel-to-reel tape recorders? I had this great big old
Wallen
Sony.
Sack or
well, this
Sony.
was the Sony, big old Sony reel-to-reel tape recorder. I went out to the car, brought it in, and she retold me these stories. And it began to change my life in terms of, sure, I grew up in an Adventist home. Yeah. Ellen White was someone that we respected in our home. She was never, as some people my generation say, crammed down my throat. I never felt that by the particular family that I grew up in. Right. So I was fortunate, I guess, from what some of my colleagues have told me. But she opened up for me the warm side of her that you don't always feel or see when you just read something in a book. And let me just share a story or two that she told me. And then I'll tell you about a few others also that I met. One of the stories she told me was hearing Ellen White pray. I remember Mrs. McKibben at the time she's telling me this is in her 90s. Yeah. Was she related to Ellen White? No. Well, her younger brother told me she was more Ellen White than Ellen White herself. That was Alonzo Baker, if you know that name. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that was her brother. Anyway, Mrs. McKibben was not well, And she was at Healdsburg, the college was in Healdsburg, or this may have been actually after the college. I'm not sure what year this happened. Maybe the college had already moved over to Angwin by then, but she was still in Healdsburg at the time. And she said that she didn't feel good. And she'd gone over to the sanitarium from Healdsburg, California, to try to get some treatments, and the san was full. Well, that's great for a manager, but it's not if you don't feel good. You want to get in.
Right.
But one of Ellen White's secretaries was a lady named Sarah Peck, Miss Peck. Another later made a real contribution to the church in education. And Miss Peck had a little cottage right next to Elmshaven. And so she said to Mrs. McKibben, why don't you come and just stay with me for a few days or however long until they get a bed up there. And so that's how Mrs. McKibben was there. And she said in the night air, through the night, she woke up. She said, I never could sleep well. When I felt bad, I really didn't sleep well. She said, through the night air, I heard, well, first she said, I saw a light come on in Ellen White's writing room in Elmshaven, right, adjacent to this cottage. And she said, I knew that Ellen White didn't even know I was there. But when you don't feel good, just knowing somebody else is even awake on the place helps a little bit. But she said, Ellen White, of course, believed in fresh air. Her windows were open in her house. Miss Peck also adhered to that policy, so her windows were open. And she said, through the night air, I heard a prayer like I've never heard before or since in my life. She said, I knew that Ellen White's, or Sister White she called her, she said, I knew Sister White's normal procedure was to get up in the middle of the night if the angel had given her a message and come from her bedroom to her writing room at Elmshaven, and then to pray and then to write out whatever she'd been shown. And so she said this night Ellen White began to pray. Now we know from other sources that Ellen White often prayed her private prayers out loud, not privately to herself. And so there she was praying, and she said, I had studied my Bible. I knew. I'd read about the burden that Isaiah or the burden that Jeremiah, these prophets had for the people of God. But she said, until that night, I never really understood it. She said, you know, you and I carry the burden for ourselves, sometimes for our spouses or our children, grandchildren, but to have the burden of a whole people. She said, she began to pray, and she said she implored God on behalf of the leaders of the church, that the leaders would always be faithful. And she said after she'd prayed a little bit for the leaders of the church, she began to pray for the pastors, that when they stand in the pulpit, they're always preaching truth. And again, she said the passion in her voice, the way she just poured out her heart to God, speaking to him on behalf of the ministry of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And she said after that, she began to talk about, pray for teachers. Well, of course, that would resonate with Mrs. McKibben. She was a teacher.
Yes.
And again, these teachers that are standing between God and the young people, trying to help these young people want to give their hearts to the Lord. She said again, it was something she had never experienced before, and has never. She said, I'd heard Ellen White pray publicly, but even her public prayers, she said, were not as intimate, as emotional for her at least as this private prayer. So again, when you begin to get those kind of insights into the type of person, when you go back and read her books, and sometimes you may read something that seems a little strong to you, you say to yourself, yeah, but this was written. Well, in fact, in some places, Ellen White says, you know, tears are falling as I'm writing these words to you. You begin to realize this is a person whose heart is burdened with a soul, the soul she's writing to, the larger audience, the soul now that's in the books that we're reading. So it was a real experience. After that, I went to visit Mrs. Grace Jacques, who's Ellen White's youngest granddaughter. And she said, why are you coming to talk to me? Now, Grace was older than my grandmother. She said, why are you coming to talk to me? She said, my mother is still alive. I said, your mother? So then I went to talk to Willie White, Ellen White's third son. This was the second wife. His first wife had died in 1890. He'd remarried in 1895.
He married a girl from Australia, I believe.
Yeah, Australian.
And she was maybe picked out by Ellen White, was she? Or
Ellen White was in on the courtship, let me tell you that.
All right.
She was. We don't usually think of Ellen White as a matchmaker.
Yeah, but she liked this woman.
Willie had picked the girl.
Yeah.
But Willie proposed, as she told me this herself. Her name was May.
Yeah.
May told me this. She said, Willie talked to me just the night before he left on a trip. And then he left it up to his mother to help clinch the deal.
Yeah, right.
Because May was a student at the time at the Melbourne Training School in Australia. Right. And so she would come over and work for Ellen White as a schoolgirl. And this is what Willie had arranged this because he'd already spied this young lady.
And he was not a young man.
No, he was 21 years older.
Yeah, right.
So, or is it 19 years older? I forgot.
Somewhere around
Somewhere in there, yeah. And so he had spied her and got her to come work. And so what are some things she did for Ellen White? Well, Ellen White was always writing and counseling and traveling and all that. So she was under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So she liked massages. Mm-hmm. And one time May came in one evening in a hurry and was a little late and was supposed to give Ellen White a salt glow, which is sort of like a massage, a salt glow. And they kept their salt, they bought their salt in 50-pound bags and their sugar in 50-pound bags. Mm-hmm. And in her rush, May dipped into the wrong bag.
Yeah.
So whatever wonderful thing happens, I've never had a salt glow, but whatever wonderful thing happens when you have a salt glow with the friction going and the sweat begins to come and the circulation improves and all that, it didn't work
with sugar.
With the sugar.
That's
but
right.
They didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And so Ellen White kind of, and realized when she tasted the sweet what was happening, and she busted out laughing and said, "May, what are you trying to do? Sweeten me up tonight?" And that put the girl at ease. Well, anyway, to talk about Ellen White, the matchmaker. So Willie leaves on this trip, and now it's in his mother's hands. Mm-hmm. And apparently every day from then on, as soon as she'd get there, Ellen White would start in. Well, have you made up your mind yet? You know Willie would make a wonderful husband. Why wouldn't you want to marry Willie? And on and on. She said, that Willie couldn't have had a better ally than his mother in his absence. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing was that May said, I had told myself there were some things that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't get married until I had these things done. Well, one of them was I won't owe any money. I'm going to be totally debt-free when I get married.
Right.
Ellen White said, well, how much do you owe? We can write a check. Now, why can't you marry Willie? Another one was, it costs money to have a wedding, even a small wedding. There's the dresses and, there's some things. Well, I said, we have a tailor here on the staff, and we have bolts of cloth and all that. We can make up any dresses or whatever. Now, why can't you marry Willie? Yeah. So anyway, she eventually married Willie White. Yeah. But it's interesting. Most people don't think of Ellen White as a matchmaker. No. We've seen other places where she was trying to get Adventist young people together that she felt would make a good pair working for the Lord. Right. And this is what she saw in this girl as someone that Willie could really relate to. Because I don't know that Willie was all that easy to get along with, but some of his tendencies would be not the easiest person to live with. But well, that could be. I don't know too much about him, but his brother, I think, was harder to get along with. Yes, right. But when you read the letters that Ellen White wrote, as I know you have, to those two, and to one about the other and so forth, sometimes the perfect son's not easy to live with either. And Willie seemed to be he was the one that his mother did seem to favor. That's true. Yeah. And he has a lot of skills that she needed. I mean, he basically, after James White died in 1881, basically he did become the one that was the agent for Ellen White, worked with her publishers and this kind of thing. Yeah. And kind of oversaw the staff and all that kind of thing. So that visit up there that started out with Mrs. McKibben. Mrs. McKibben, Alma McKibben. Actually turned your whole life around. I didn't know it at the time. Yeah. I had not a clue, obviously. But you got a taste for this. You got a desire. Well, I already liked history. There's no question. I liked history before. Yeah. But my interest in Adventist history grew. Yeah. I'll tell you another story that was told to me by Ellen White's oldest granddaughter. Okay. And again, this is kind of providential if you look at how things happened. I mean, at the time I didn't realize it, but looking back now on what happened then, I went to see. Now this is in the 60s. This is in the 60s. So this is 66, 67, 68, in through there. Willie White's wife died in 69, his second wife, May. So she had remarried. She had remarried. Oh, now that's another interesting story. I don't know how much you want to talk about May and how much you want to talk about Ellen White. Let's move on. I'll just mention that. I'll quit being the historian now and just ask the questions. That's fine. She was, when I knew her, her name was Ethel May Lacey. That was her maiden name. Ethel May Lacey. Then she married White, W.C. White. So Ethel May Lacey White. And then she married Arthur Corral. So she was Ethel May Lacey White Corral when I met her. And
sound like a law firm. And
well, her father was in the British Civil Service, and even though she was in her 90s when you visited her, she was very prim and proper. I mean, she was a proper lady. So but anyway, when I was there, here visiting from Pennsylvania, this was out in California, visiting from Pennsylvania was Ellen White's oldest granddaughter.
All right.
I didn't know the lady, never met her. I had no idea who was even in the room. There were two ladies in this room. I thought they were roommates. Turned out to be Ellen White's oldest granddaughter. And after we'd visited a bit, May said to me, "You don't want to talk to me. You want to talk to this lady." "Well, who's that?" "Well, that's Ella, the oldest granddaughter." So I said, okay. Well, long story short was, before things, I wanted to do a recording of her too, like I had done with May. The long story short was that before it was all done, Ella had convinced me to come clear across country to the White estate, which, as I say, I hardly even knew existed in those days, meet her brother so that we could do the recording there.
Okay.
Now, you want to talk about a shy kid, and I realize this is going everywhere, but I'm going to fess up just in case anybody has this tape still kicking around. The Ministerial Association did the interview, prepared the interview as a Ministerial Association tape of the month.
Right.
So there's still reel-to-reel copies kicking around out there somewhere. And if you listen to it to this day, I must confess, I'm still very embarrassed by it, because Ella is an elderly lady who's talking like this, and then there's this scared kid asking her questions. So, but again, it made it possible for me to meet Arthur White. Which years later, he was the one that helped hire me for the position that I later had at Loma Linda.
Okay.
So again, you look back on this story and you say, wow, I could see God's leading. At the time, I had no idea. Anyway, I want to tell you this other story about Ella. Ella was a teenager in Australia. She and her younger sister, Mabel, were the two daughters from Willie White's first wife. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Mary Kelsey White had died in 1890 of tuberculosis. So after Willie, their father, remarried, then the two girls from the first marriage were brought to Australia. They'd been left in America when Willie White and Ellen White went to Australia in 1891, because it was thought that there was pioneer work going on. We had something like 500 to 1,000 Seventh-day Adventists in all the South Pacific, so Australia, New Zealand, everywhere back in those days. So they didn't think, they should bring the girls. Well, anyway, when they got over there, after a little while, they were starting to build what today is Avondale College. And Ella told me that it was pretty primitive, really quite primitive. For a while, Ellen White built Sunnyside, her home down there, and I guess Ella and her grandmother even stayed in a tent for a little while the house was being built. Anyway, it was so primitive that there were no motels, no place. When parents wanted to come and see if they wanted to send their children to the new school, they ended up usually having to stay in somebody's house. And whose house seemed to be the most popular place to stay was Ellen White's. In fact, she, in one of her letters, mentions the fact that she had so much company, she thought she'd just put a sign up on the front of her house that said free lodging. Because everybody came for free anyway, and they stayed and stayed and stayed. So, but anyway, it was a bit of a challenge for Ella and Willie's family, because if you couldn't get into Grandma's, Ellen White's house, then they seemed to want to stay at Willie White's house. And Ella said, that just was more work. It meant more kerosene lamp chimneys that had to be cleaned. The pots they did all their cooking on wood stoves, so they had to scour the smoke off at the bottoms and all that. More laundry to do, more cooking to do. I mean, everything. There was just more work. And Ella said, it's really not fair. There was a little church school, and some of her classmates were in the church school, and they didn't have all that company. So they had more time for their homework and that kind of thing. And Ella said, this is just not right. So she began to pray to God, please impress my mother, which was really her stepmother. Please impress my mother not to ask me to do so many chores. Now, she was probably 14, 15, 16, something like that at the time. So that's a prayer you might think a kid could pray. I mean, it's a believable story, let's put it that way. So she's praying. Well, she said the normal routine at that time was that Ellen White, if she wasn't traveling, would come over from her house in the morning after breakfast, and she would visit for a few minutes, and then after that she'd go back to her house and do her work, and Willie and his family would do their thing for the day. So she said it was usually a pretty cut and dry formula. Grandma would come in. We would sit in the parlor for a little while. We would all visit. By this time, Willie and May had twin little baby boys, so that meant that these little babies were probably kicking around and maybe wiggling a little bit. So after a few minutes, Ella and Mabel would take their twin half-brothers into the other room, play with them, so that, the grandma and Papa and Mama, Ellen White and Willie and his wife, could visit a little more. So she said on this morning, shortly after she'd started praying this prayer about, Lord, please impress my mother not to ask me to do so much, why Grandma came. Okay, nothing was different than normal. She said that was fine, except, she said, when we got to the place in the conversation where it seemed like this is the time where Mabel and I take the twin boys and our brothers into the other room, Grandma said, no. She said, I have a message for you. So she said her grandmother reached in her satchel, I guess we'd call it a purse or bag or something, and she brought out this manuscript, and she began to read. And Ella said, the first was counsel to my father, to Willie White, Ellen White's son. It's about things he should do, and I think at that point he was chairman of the new school board and whatever, all responsibilities he had, but things that he should do. And Ella said, no problem. It wasn't to me. It was to Papa. No problem. And so Grandma kept reading. And pretty soon Ellen White starts reading some counsel to Willie White's new wife, to the stepmother of Ella and Mabel. No problem still for Ella. It wasn't to me. It was things that my mother needs to be doing in the family, do things a little differently, etc. No problem. But she said she kept reading. And she got to a section where she started reading to me. Ella, you need to be doing this and that and the other thing. And what was it that she was telling Ella that she should be doing? She said, your mother is so busy and has so much work with all this company and all. You should be doing more to help your mother. Now, what was Ella praying for? Yeah, right. Lord, impress my mother not to have me do so much.
Right.
And here is Ellen White saying you should do more to help your mother. Yeah. And furthermore, everything you do, no matter how insignificant it may seem to you, you should do everything you can to the best of your ability. And Ella told me, she said, Jim, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I really got angry. This seems so unfair. I had just been praying, God, please help me, or help my mother to tell me to do less.
Right. And
now here's this counsel from grandmother. And she said, I got so upset. I finally blurted out and said, Grandma, did you really, did the angel really tell you all that? Or did you just put some of that in on your own? And she said, Grandma assured me that there was nothing in that testimony except what the angel had shown her. She said, Ella said, there was a little bit later on before her grandmother left to Mabel. She said, I was so mad, upset, I don't know what was said to Mabel. And she said, I could hardly wait for grandmother to get out of the house. She said, I ran to my room and I threw myself across my bed and I sobbed and I sobbed. It seemed so unfair. Here I'd just been praying, God, please help my mother to ask me to do less. And here comes this testimony, which she even says the angel gave her the whole message.
Yeah.
That I should be doing more.
Wow.
And she said, I could hardly wait. She said, I was so angry that I just was there sobbing my heart out. And then she said, all of a sudden it dawned on me. This was the answer to my prayer. It's not the answer I wanted.
No.
But it's the answer to my prayer.
Yes.
And she said, ever since then, and she was in her 80s when she told me this story, she said, ever since then, I have been eternally grateful that I was the recipient of one of God's messages to my grandmother. But she said, my first reaction was anger.
Yeah.
Now, why has that story particularly been helpful to me? If you visited with Ella very long at all, you knew that she idolized her grandmother, she loved her grandmother, she would have done almost anything for her grandmother. And yet, when the testimony came that cut across what she wanted to do, what was her first reaction? Anger. Now, you and I, we've never met Ellen White.
No.
We don't have that personal love for having been around her and seen her and interacted with her. And so, again, at that time, I had no idea I was ever going to work for the White Estate. But sometimes we do run into people that are upset and angry about things. And when I do, I try to keep in perspective the fact, yeah, but they've never known Ellen White. Maybe somebody did misuse Ellen White's writings.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody did cram some things down their throat that should not have been presented the way it was. I don't know what's going on with them, but I know it's been extremely helpful for me in my work to keep in perspective that somebody that I knew loved Ellen White, her first reaction when the testimony cut across what she wanted was anger.
Yeah. So we shouldn't be surprised if we have somewhat the same reaction.
Sometimes.
And we need to work through counsel.
And find out what our problem is, because the counsel is there to help us on our walk to the holy city.
Right. And to direct our paths, not just saying block and putting a roadblock up, but directing us towards the way the Lord would have us to go. And I have yet to find any counsel in the writings of Ellen White that I felt was not really apropos for a better life.
Well, you're right. And once in a while you will find something that seems very strong, maybe to the right or to the left. But when you go and look at the context and see who she's writing to,
Specific time, specific situation.
Sometimes she's writing to somebody who's way out here,
yeah,
and she may be writing over here so that she can maybe get them back to here.
Right.
I mean, this is the problem that she had. And then the people that don't need the counsel, they'll take it and they go even further with it.
Right.
So this was a challenge that she had. And so that's something to remember when you're reading Ellen White's writings. Pray to the Holy Spirit. Ask the Holy Spirit to help you find out what's relevant for your life. Because not everything is written for you. I mean, I don't have every problem that's in there, thank goodness. I've enough. But I don't have every problem that the Lord helped her address.
And so you don't, everything there doesn't necessarily apply to you.
Right. So if you ask the Lord to help you find that which will help you in your own Christian experience, your own walk with the Lord, to deepen that relationship with Jesus, my experience is that happens. But again, when you look at it in context, I agree with you totally. I don't know of anything that isn't balanced and doesn't make sense.
You know, when you got to visit with these ladies, you did record those visits.
I did.
And so you have those recordings.
I do.
Are they available?
No.
They are personal recordings.
Well,
will you ever make them available?
Well, now you're pushing me a little. Well, here's one of my plans. Ellen White died in 1915. So 2015 is the centennial of her death.
Yes.
One of the things that I want to do is to get those all digitized and made available as part of, because there's several things that I'm working on that I'd like to see happen in 2015.
Right.
One of them would be those tapes.
Oh, that'd be great. So they will be available.
Yeah, I've gotten them out now, and we're starting to digitize them and have to decide how many are like this and how many are where I can not too embarrassed. Or maybe I'll re-record the questions. I don't know.
Right. And then I ask.
Yes. And now it's an old man asking an old lady instead of a young.
Here's her answer.
Yeah, instead of a young kid asking.
Right. Right. Well, we'd like to hear them in their entirety. But even if you did do them in an edited version where you ask something and then you don't edit what they answer.
No, well, I'm not even sure I would do that. I mean, I'm not too embarrassed. I was just a kid. Yeah. And if it says some kind of thing on the cover that the guy that did this recording didn't know anything about oral history, I don't remember even hearing the word oral history. Right. Now, of course, it's a big thing in the history field, to do oral histories. But I just got this idea, wouldn't it be fun to record these people? And so I did.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, so you heard some fantastic stories, and some of these stories changed your life. And were there any stories that you heard that kind of surprised you? Surprised me? Well, her as a matchmaker, I'd never thought about. In fact, the reason that I even asked May about her, here I'm a college kid, I'm not married at the time, and I'm thinking to myself, well, this courtship went on right under Ellen White's nose, so that's probably the one that surprised me the most. I was not expecting, she had never been presented to me as a matchmaker. Yeah.
Some way I'd missed that in Spirit of Prophecy class, etc. I just had never seen Ellen White. That one probably surprised me as much as any. Her warmth, her love for people, her care for people, her sense of humor, those were all traits that probably have been brought out more by teachers and by people speaking the last 30 or 40 years than when I was growing up in the church. I don't remember her being, having a good sense of humor. Right. She had a good sense of humor.
Well, for instance, have you got anything you could share with us?
Well, I'll give you a short one. Yeah. One time she's speaking, And this is one that's been told quite often, so maybe some of your viewers will have already heard this one. But she's preaching, and she's noticing that people out there in the congregation are looking around a little. And you know, if you're up in front, you say, well, is my tie crooked? I'm sure she was saying, is my button come undone? Or what? Everything seems in order, and she can't figure out why people are reacting the way they are. And partway through her sermon, she happens to glance over her shoulder, and there's her full-grown son, W.C. White, sound asleep on the platform right behind her. Now she knows why everybody out there is kind of laughing a little bit, because mother has put son to sleep with her preaching.
Yes.
And she knew she had to say something. So the account is that she said, well, you know, when Willie was a baby, I used to take him to church when I was speaking. In fact, one account, and I wish I could verify this a little bit more, but I'll go ahead and use it anyway because it came from a person that I think is reliable. I hope it's reliable. Yeah. Anyway, she said that when he was a baby, she had a special rocker made, or cradle made, with extra wide foot rockers. And she said, I would stand and rock with one foot as I was speaking, rock this cradle, and he learned to sleep during my sermons, and you can see that he's never outgrown the habit. And that little sense of humor, they could all laugh. He probably woke up, but it would acknowledge what, now she knows, what they've all known for the last however long he's been sleeping up there.
Sure.
So that was that kind of using the sense of humor. There's another one time, somebody, this was about 1914, a lady, a missionary's wife in Japan, made a nice hug me tight, which is some kind of a vest or sweater or something type clothes. Made this nice piece of clothing anyway, and sent it over to Elmshaven, to Ellen White's home from Japan. And when they open it, of course, the first thing you do if you find a nice piece of homemade clothing, what do you do? Handmade clothing, I should say. What do? You try it on. Well, it didn't fit. It only came about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way around when Ellen White tried it on. And so she asked her secretary to please write to Sister Diviney and tell Sister Diviney how much she appreciated it and how thoughtful it was of her to make this for her. But then, according to the account that's come to us, she said with kind of a chuckle, but please also tell her there's a great deal more to Ellen White than some people think. So again, her sense of humor. But everything that I've heard from people that remembered her is she wasn't giggly or silly or anything like that.
No,
but she had a good, active sense of humor.
Yeah, and she didn't take herself too seriously.
If something happened that was funny, that went on, she was just as much could laugh at it just as much as anybody else.
I'm sure you've heard the stories that M.V. Campbell tells are told. He's now sleeping and waiting for the Lord to return. But he told about her coming to a camp meeting when his father was a conference president. And the fact that she brought gifts for the children and a few other things that took place where they had some treats during the week that he never thought Ellen White would ever enjoy. Like they had some white bread and with cinnamon on it and some whipped cream on it and things of that nature.
Oh, well, see, they used to make ginger cookies and put in half the ginger. Her favorite dessert was lemon pie, according to the members in the family. So, yeah, she was a popular hostess. People liked to come. As I mentioned earlier, they'd stay and stay and stay. Why? Good food, good conversation, and she didn't charge. You know,
I have a doctor that has written me a letter one time and just gave me a rough time and quoted a lot of things about her. And he doesn't realize I'm nearly 100 pounds lighter than I used to be, but it's a battle. There's no question about it. It's my whole lifetime battle. And I wanted to write him back and just say, would you take a good look at a picture of the person you've just quoted. She was never accused of being thin.
No.
They called her a little lady because she was not very tall, but she was fairly stocky, as demonstrated by the garment that the lady made for her. In her statement, there's a great deal more to Ellen White.
Well, you can take that more than one way.
Exactly. And so I really appreciate her humor and appreciate the humanist of an individual who was gifted by God, could have had taken themselves very seriously, and in my view, that would have ruined the gift. Well,
and it's getting out those messages. I mean, that's really, you asked me earlier about the work of the White Estate. That's really what we're trying to do. One of the things that we're focusing on now is getting Ellen White books in as many languages as possible. I mean, if you go to the White Estate website, you will find that you can download for free Ellen White books now in 11 different languages. Wow. We're hoping eventually to have every Ellen White book that's ever been translated into any language up there on the website, so you can download it for free, and you can download it to your iPad, and you know, all these different modern mechanisms. We're putting them in all these different formats so that people can have easy access.
Well, if you'd like to get in touch with Jim Nix, or you'd like to contact the White Estate, this is how you can do it.
If you would like to contact Jim Nix, or if you'd like to know more about this ministry, then you can write to Ellen G. White Estate, 12501 Old Columbia Pike, Silver Spring, Maryland, 20904. That's Ellen G. White Estate, 12501 Old Columbia Pike, Silver Spring, Maryland, 20904. You can call 301-680-6540. That's 301-680-6540. You can also visit them online for devotionals, books, and more at ellenwhite.org. That's ellenwhite.org. Contact them today. They'd love to hear from you.
And we encourage you to make contact with the Ellen G. White Estate. And you may want to have a part in helping to put these books into other languages. Tell us a little bit about that, Jim.
Well, it's really important. We have the books in English, and for anyone that's listening and can understand this program and can download all of Ellen White's books for free from our website, you could put them on Android or your Kindle or whatever else. I mean, it's all there.
Yeah.
You can find it on our website, but we're trying to make the same thing available in other languages.
Okay.
It does cost us, on average, about $1,500 per book.
And how many books are there?
Well, we don't even know. There's thousands that have been translated.
Right.
And we've had some donors that have helped us. ASI has helped us with their offering.
Yeah.
And we're very grateful for that, because this is only work that can be done as people donate. And if somebody wants to donate for this project, they certainly can go to our website. There's a place there where you can donate. And we would be grateful. And I know that people in other parts of the world would be grateful if they have the same privilege to read Ellen White books in their language that we have, who read English or even Spanish or Portuguese.
You know, the amazing thing is the price that some people have paid in other countries. When I first went to Ukraine, 1991, I had friends there who had been translating like Great Controversy, and I have a Great Controversy that they typed by hand, and some of them had been in the penitentiary for 2, even 3 years, just for typing the Great Controversy. So some of those places have opened up.
And it wasn't just typing. I mean, if you heard the stories, you know, they had to have rooms in their houses that were insulated.
That's
and they would sit there by the hour typing, pounding away.
10 copies on carbon paper.
That's it, manual typewriters. It's incredible what they did. I was over there in Ukraine one time a few years ago, and someone was telling about how his mother was one of these.
Yes.
And he said that they bought him a soccer ball one year for his birthday or Christmas, I forgot which. He said, I didn't like soccer. I didn't know why they bought me this soccer ball, but they would tell me to go out and kick this soccer ball around.
Make a lot of noise.
And that's exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
To distract any noise that might come from the fact she's pounding away on this manual typewriter.
Usually in a closet.
In a closet,
With very poor light and copying these great
It's incredible what this gift has meant to people. And it has, you know, when you look at it from the church's standpoint, when we have followed the principles in those writings, we've prospered as a church. There have been a few times in our history when we've kind of faltered a little bit in terms of adhering to the counsels that God gave us. And if you look back at those times, well, there's usually a pretty good reason.
We got time for about a 2-minute story.
Well, what can I tell in 2 minutes? Another story about Ellen White. And let me tell you a brief story. I think I can try to do this one in 2 minutes. And again, it shows the value of Ellen White's, her interpersonal relations. This Mrs. McKibben that I told you about. When Ellen White went to Australia in 1891 and was down there until 1900, and then again, she didn't come. She owned her house still in Healdsburg. When she came back to the United States, she still didn't move into Healdsburg home. She bought Elmshaven. So the Healdsburg home was available. Mrs. McKibben rented the home from Ellen White. She said Ellen White came one time to visit her not too long after she'd come back from Australia, and she wanted to see her old house. And she said as she was going through the house, well, we came to the stairway to the second floor, and Mrs. McKibben had a handrail put on, And Ellen White commented what a blessing that was. They got upstairs and turned to the left at the top of the stairs, and there was Mrs. McKibben's bedroom, and over in the corner was a table, and she was writing. And Mrs. White wanted to know, what are you writing about? I'm writing lessons, Bible lessons for our children. Oh, that's so important, she said. And then she commented to Mrs. McKibben, that's the corner where I finished writing Patriarchs and Prophets.
Wow.
Which was a book that was very special to Mrs. McKibben anyway.
Yes.
She said, as we were leaving, as Ellen White was leaving, she said she asked me how I was going with this writing. She kind of came back to this project. She said, well, I don't have some books on certain parts of Old Testament history, etc. And Mrs. White said, okay. And she said a few days later, here came Ellen White's secretary with a box of books from Ellen White's library. Mm-hmm. Just another token of this lady and her gift and her love for people, and she wanted to support this teacher who was writing these books on her own.
Yeah.
Bible textbooks for our church schools. Yeah. That's Mrs. White.
Right, right. And she did a great deal of research when she was writing things like Patriarchs and Prophets and Kings.
Yeah, and you'll find quotes from Ellen White. And sometimes they're paraphrased, sometimes they are footnoted, but yeah.
Right. Well, listen, this has been fascinating for me, and I know it has been for you. And Jim, we just appreciate so much the work of the Ellen G. White estate and the work that you do. And we just believe so much that the Lord has his hand on this work, and we believe it and we trust it with all of our hearts. Well, listen, we'll be back right after this. It's a real privilege to get to visit with this gentleman. He is one of the most outstanding historians anywhere in the country, but especially in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and with a specific area of expertise, though he has a great general area, of the spirit of prophecy and of Adventist history. And so we're going to really enjoy this today. You're going to learn some things. We're going to have a good time visiting with Jim and realizing that the gift of prophecy is a gift that was given to this church. And we're so thankful for that gift. You know, sometimes people get the idea that the gift of prophecy is a prophet sits around all day talking about the future and foreseeing the future. There are prophecies that take place in the work of a prophet, but more than that, the prophet directs us to the Word of God, directs us, and if you look back at Elijah and Isaiah and all the others, they didn't spend all their time talking about the future. They spent a great deal of their time pointing people, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. And I think you're going to see today that that has been... Well, welcome. We're so happy that you could join us today. And I have, as my guest today, Jim Nix, who is head of the Ellen G. White Estate. Jim, welcome. So
Thank
happy
you.
to have
It's good
you
to be
here. And it is just... a great deal of the gift of prophecy for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And as a result, we have been leading and been led to move into the right direction and to follow the counsel of the Word of God. So we're going to really learn some things today, and I think you're going to enjoy this discussion that Jim and I are going to have together. Before we do that, I'd like for us to hear some music. And Jamie George is one of my favorite individuals. I was talking to Jamie the other day, and he's got some really fantastic plans for the future as we were talking about and praying about. And you'll hear more about those a little later. But right now, he's going to play for us, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God."